course, no days off. Celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday with our 50-50 elected mayor, Mayor Quinn Lucas. Now, Mayor Lucas, last Tuesday, hundreds of drivers were pulled over on Highway 71 during a coordinated enforcement effort. I know your authority over KCPD is limited, but for a lot of Kansas Cityans, especially people in the inner city who rely on 71 to get to work, it feels like less of safety and more like disruption. We all agree reckless driving is a real issue, but how do we address dangerous behavior on 71 without turning routine commutes into mass pullovers that end up punishing everyone for the actions of a few?
You know what? That's a good question. First of all, I always look to make sure that we are being equitable in our public safety, speeding traps, all of that. We have gotten a lot of complaints on 71 highway. We have seen accidents on 71, so we need people slowing down. Usually the way the police do traffic enforcement these days is these types of operations. Very different than when you and I were growing up, and they may just be on one or two random streets, and then they move to the next one and the next one. What we need to make sure we're doing is having those consistent operations all around the city, seeing them on Ward Parkway, seeing them on 152, seeing them in all other spots. So I'll never promise that we won't do it. I think the way that we are more fair is making sure that one community isn't seeing that more than others. I do, however, encourage everybody, make sure you are following the rules, the speed limits. I still want us to have traffic cameras. I know that hasn't come to fruition yet, but I think we are going to make sure people are safer on these roads throughout Kansas City.
Mayor Lucas, with ICE visibly operating in Kansas City, a lot of people feel like they're moving around unchecked. You voiced concerns and supported ordinances, but for everyday Kansas Cityans, especially black residents who already know what it feels like to be targeted, there's real fear and confusion. If someone is confronted by ICE, Mayor Lucas, what legal authority do those officers actually have in our city? What residents are required to comply with, and what rights do Kansas Cityans have to protect themselves in those moments?
I'm going to give you real advice, and then I'll give you the legal advice. Real advice, we see what's happening around the world, as we as black Kansas Cityans, black Americans know, is that you may have any number of legal remedies, but that won't keep you alive. So make sure that you, unfortunately, in some situations, even if it's unlawful, follow the instruction. Stay alive. We can get you lawyers. We can get you connected afterwards. That's going to be step one. What is it that they can legally do? They're here to enforce the laws of the immigration laws of the United States, not the traffic laws of Kansas City, not the rental laws of Missouri, not any of those other steps. What we are seeing right now is a group that is working without, it appears to be supervision, without concern as to the safety of Americans, and they are in around every inner city in America. Let me tell you something straight up. Part of the reason for the focus in Minnesota and Minneapolis right now is Somalians, is black immigrant populations. Full stop. You got immigrants in every city in America. You got them all around, and you've got thousands right now in Minneapolis, which is a matter of population, I believe, actually has fewer people than Kansas City, Missouri. And so let's make sure that we fight where we need to fight. That's why I was proud to draft and introduce an ordinance last week about not having an ICE detention center camp of up to 10,000 people. But in the meantime, make sure you do what you can to stay alive. So we will have connections for everybody. I'll be at St. James Methodist Church tonight at 6 o'clock, talking about, at least listening to, I think, a good community conversation on some of these things where our rights are. And remember that black people have always been the center of our civil rights struggle. And that continues today, no matter the color, no matter the origin of the people who are being impacted day by day.
Now, Kansas City Food Not Bombs has been serving free meals in the Lykins neighborhood in the historic Northeast KC for years, Mayor Lucas. And a few weeks ago, 2 volunteers were arrested for trespassing while doing just that. You often talk about common sense in politics. So from a Kansas Citian's perspective, Mayor Lucas, what message does it send when people trying to help feed their neighbors end up in handcuffs? And how do we balance enforcement with basic humanity?
You know, I think it is always important to make sure that we're looking at enforcement balance with basic humanity. The issue on that one is one that I think could be addressed The landlord of that property, as I understand it, called the police, reported folks for trespass. No different than if you had people on your house, at your house, on your street corner, and beyond. I think telling people, making sure there are clear instructions to move on, is something that can be the easiest approach. I don't know the full details of the situation, particularly in terms of if there were warnings telling people, look, y'all need to just go over there, you need to be on the sidewalk, you need to do something different. But I think that's the sort of communication you need. Nobody wants anybody arrested for just doing good things for the people. So I think there are easier ways to make sure it's balanced.
What is one thing that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what is the impact he had on your life?
His fight for those who are poor and working class. I tend to not be one of the sanitized Dr. King people. I'm the late in life Dr. King people in terms of what I read about. In terms of the fact that right before his assassination, indeed before his assassination, he was in Memphis to be there for a strike of sanitation workers. Remember where the game is played. The game is not played in colorful language, although that is important. It is played each and every day in terms of making sure that working class people, working class Black people, can have rights to social uplift. That's what we need to work on each and every day. It's not about one person having a seat somewhere. It's about all of us having equal opportunity.
Mayor Lucas, thank you so much for joining us on another edition of All Things KC. We'll holler at you next week. Have a good one and continue to be a blessing.
God bless you.